Hey all, thank you for joining me this week on Permanent Airwaves. I'm TC Kirkham, TKR Radio Central. Gotta love the new camo, gives me all kinds of new backgrounds. This week, going to talk to somebody that some of you may know. He's a member of the vinyl community. He's a seller. He's also a record store owner. But he started off way back in the day as a disc jockey. There's an old saying, when you go and stop jockeying, you start that record store. And in this case, it's sort of true, except he stopped in the middle to do television, to become a professor, and a whole bunch of other stuff. You guys may know him. He's one half of two guys talking about records, and he's also become a friend of mine thanks through Steve Carlson. And I wanted to talk to him about his radio career, and it is a fascinating discussion. I want to say thank you in advance for joining us, because we had some technical difficulties during our discussion a few weeks ago, but I've taken care of that, and you get the full, best possible look at his career. So please stick around and take a look at me discussing radio, television, professorship, record stores, and more with the owner of Radio Wasteland Records in Midland, Michigan. This is Jim Gleason. Have you always been interested in radio, or is this something you've wanted to do since you were a kid, or is it just something that you stumbled into?
Kind of a half and half thing with that, TC. Coming up into high school, I'd always had an affinity for audio production and listening to music and the like. Had a little tape recorder as a kid and made little skits and like that and such. And then into high school, and I started high school, I think in 79 and graduated in 83, but into high school, I was one of the AV kids, ones that pushed the carts around. Got out of an hour of class a day because I got to push carts around and deliver film strips and projectors and the like, but that was still kind of into that. But that also gave me access to early video production equipment. And I remember we used to have in the system, we had a Betamax tape recorder with an external deck. And so playing with something like that was just, it was cool, but you look back at that and some of the goofy stuff you try to do. But that gave me a taste for what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until I started college at Northern Michigan University in Marquette, Michigan in 1985 that it really began to click and coalesce for me at that point in time. I started volunteering at the college radio station at Northern. It was WBKX. And I think it was toward the end of my first semester there. And I was already started into some of the broadcasting classes. So that was kind of a natural flow heading over to that station. And from there, it was just like something clicked in me. And I said, man, radio is what I want to do, because this is a lot of fun, but it's also a different time for radio.
I know you'd mentioned at one point, this was not your typical radio station because it was a old-fashioned carrier current riding the wires.
Very, very much so. Yeah. The station at the time, BKX at Northern, did not have an FM broadcast license. That's something we worked on during my time as a manager there. Never came to fruition while I was there, but they finally did go FM a few years after that. But yeah, the carrier current station was an interesting concept where the radio signal would actually be piggybacked onto electrical wires, broadcast into a closed environment throughout the campus. So they called it wired wireless, I think, and invented in really the late 1800s, but came to more prominence in the 1940s. But by late 1970s, when the station was formed, and when I got there in mid 80s, that was where it was. But yeah, you had to have your AM radio plugged into an outlet to be able to pick up the radio station signal or nearby. It was kind of the equivalent of a 1 to 5 watt signal being broadcast. And I still remember it was 600 AM. But in addition to that, too,
what's
there was
AM, Daddy?
It's AM. Yeah, it's still AM. Yeah. There was another emerging technology at the time called cable television. And again, the early days of cable TV, it was really more of a municipal thing. It wasn't owned by companies and corporations. It was a community oriented thing. And so part of that was that the university had a deal where they would carry the couple of the public station. I think I was on there as well. Really kind of an early form of streaming, but the college radio station had a deal as well. So we were piggybacked into that at 104.5. So I can still remember the calls to this day. It's WBKX 600 AM, 104.5 FM stereo cable. And we broadcast to probably a few dozen people at a time every day, but it was still one of the greatest experiences ever.
Yeah, if you had listeners, that was what counted. People obviously
Yes.
remembered it. You guys were what you would call an alternative station now, but at the time it was brand new college music, REM and acts like that.
Yep.
That had to be completely different because it was the kind of music that was just starting to emerge. And
Yeah,
is that what did it work well for the
it,
station?
oh, it did. It did as it did for most college radio stations at that time. And you try to talk to younger folks today about, I mean, there's so much music out today, but to say that, okay, I cut my teeth on hard rock, late 70s, early 80s, you're, very rural area in mid-Michigan. Judas Priest, Def Leppard, AC/DC, Rush. I saw all these bands in concert. I played them
Hmm.
on my cassette deck. I had records from all of them as well. That was where it was. And that was what was cool. And then I got to college in 85 and I came in raring to go. I'm going to play all these Rush, you're going to rock out here. And then all of a sudden I look and say, well, this is interesting. Here's a record from the Clash, and this is something called REM, and here's the Jam. And I started listening to those. And I thought it blew my mind because it was so different and it was so new. And it was unlike anything that I'd heard, even though it had been around for a few years. I just wasn't exposed to it until
Right.
I got to college radio. And yes, there was all this hard rock there. And the station, luckily, it was a great place to be because the station had formed in the mid 70s. And so by the time I got there in 85, it's about 10 years old, they had a mammoth, and I mean mammoth, vinyl collection. And that was the predominant format being used at
Hmm.
this station at the time. So they had jazz, they had blues, they had country, they had all of this stuff. And they had a lot of the rock and roll that I really, really wanted to dive into. But the new stuff coming in, the music director was constantly putting out heavy rotation. Try this, try this, try this. And all of a sudden, my mind is just blown. It's like, these things are great. I love this music. And so I was able to open up. But to experience something at that time that was something so new, you're not going to get that kind of experience ever again. And I don't think anybody really can nowadays.
Yeah. And you said you worked your way up through the system, eventually becoming
Yep.
the general manager of the station for
I did. Yeah.
years.
5 years as an undergrad. Most people try to do it in 4, but that's, you know, yeah, I did a semester or two as a DJ and kind of got the lay of the land and figured out that I really enjoyed it. And I had kind of a knack for it and was really having fun with it. So then I moved into a program director slot. So I was in charge of kind of working with the music director and the other personnel director to make sure that we were programming the slots and we had enough personnel to fill. It was at the time, I think it was probably 50 to 60 volunteers running the station for the better part, almost 20 hours a day. There was a few down hours in the overnights, but programming that. And from then I moved into general manager of the station, and I ran the college station for 2 years, doing everything from the personnel overseeing to the budgeting to just general PR and work like that, gaining some very, very valuable experience that I thought at the time was great. And then I rounded things up as the music director in my last year, where I was kind of coasting and going from there, but having a lot of fun with that.
Mhm. And you've worked your way around different stations since college, including television, right?
Yep. During my time at the student station, it was a great feeder for a lot of the commercial elements around him, because the program I was in at Northern at the time in the 80s was broadcasting. I somehow got a Bachelor of Science out of that. Don't ask me. It was a loophole. Instead of Bachelor of Arts. So I got the BS floating around in there. But it was really a great source because the radio stations and ultimately the cable and the cable stations and ultimately the television station were looking to the college at the time for a lot of the folks that were getting that experience. So while I was DJing and running the student station, I began working commercial radio. And the first one was overnights at a top 40 station just outside of Marquette, a little town called Ishpeming. They've since moved to Marquette, but WMQT. And it was just a minimum wage. I think it was $2.85 at the time, and I was working
Yeah,
overnights.
that was a while ago.
Yep, I was working overnights, top 40. I still get some PTSD when I hear Wang Chung or Peter Cetera. A little tick because it was over and over and over again. So I'd work 11 p.m. till 5 a.m. I'd get up, come home, sleep for an hour, get up, go to some classes, and then go to the student station to work. And it was a busy time, but you're young and you can do that. So yeah, I moved from the top 40 station, and then I went to work at an AM talk radio station, working evenings there. And it was pretty much just a board jockey position. The station carried Red Wings and Tigers and the off nights through there, and then they just did cable feed news for the rest of the time. So I just would cut in with local weather and the likes, but still gaining that experience. And then I kind of bopped out of that and went to work for the local cable television, the LO office there, doing high school and sports and city meetings and the like, and ended up going back to the AM station. That was WDMJ, by the way. That's one of the older stations in Marquette, when they moved into a rock music format. So I was there for a while. Then I worked for it was an oldie. Well, I'll get to the oldie station in a second here. Also, as a student, I began working at the public radio station. So it was really kind of the clash of both worlds. I'm it was the 80s, so don't judge, but I had one of those little rat tails and an earring in the 80s. And I'm working
I had the
student
rat tail. I
radio.
didn't have the earring.
I'm working student radio in the afternoons and evenings. And then every morning I'd get up at 3 a.m. to go work at the public radio station. I was the morning edition show engineer, and I would do local sports and weather on that. And I'd have to talk very seriously and lower the public radio voice from there. Then after I graduated, I moved into television. I worked at a television news station in Marquette, WLUC, as a reporter primarily, but I did anchoring duties as well. I did that for a couple of years, and I had an opportunity to get back into radio, and I took the job as a general manager of a 100,000 watt oldie station. It was a satellite station at the time, and they had kind of a LMA group ownership type of thing going on. So I didn't get to do too much, but I was still in charge of everything. And in radio, you probably know this too. It's really kind of a rite of passage that you must be fired from a station or two. The oldie station general manager slot was my coup de grace of being fired. So rather spectacularly. And I left that, went back to television, and didn't really get into radio again until we moved to the lower part of Michigan, Upper Peninsula down here, lower part of Michigan in 97. And I took a few part-time jobs at a couple of different radio stations down here.
So all of this experience that you had, television, college, commercial, public, led eventually to you becoming an educator in the field as well, both television and radio, or just television?
Television, radio, and film. It was really
And
kind
film,
of
okay.
a very broad thing. Yeah, I was after we moved down here, and I tried working television down here, and I did some videography at the station. My wife has been radio and television, by the way, all our lives together. We met at the college radio station, and she's working at the TV station. And I gave that a shot, and I didn't want to work a bigger city television. It just was, Saginaw was not for me. So I had moved into some independent and freelance production work. I did a lot of videography for an outdoor show, aired nationally on the Outdoor Channel. So I got to do some cool traveling for that. But then I worked for a company that did a lot of video production work for Dow. And so there was some cool stuff in there. And one of the jobs that I'd gotten as a freelancer was to produce a training video, or shoot and produce a training video for a local community college. And when I wrapped that up, the program manager at the public television station at this college said, "Hey, we need an instructor. You seem to know what you're doing. You want to give it a shot?" And I'm like, I've never been a teacher. I've just always been working in radio and television. He says, "Man, you know what you're doing. So let's try that." So I ended up taking a job as an instructor. And then within, it's kind of like what I did at the college radio station. Within a year, of me becoming an instructor doing part-time stuff. I was in charge of an entire program and was told if you want to keep doing this, go get a master's degree. So I did, went and got a master's degree in communications and multimedia, and was a college professor for 16, 17 years.
And was that at the time, was that all you were focusing on, was the professor job and what you were teaching people?
Pretty much, yeah. And toward the end of that, I weaseled my way into the public radio station to do a alternative music show on a very stuffy public radio station, which didn't go over well. It only lasted about a year, but it was still kind of fun. Which, by the way, the name of that show was Radio Wasteland. So there's a little side trivia there.
Aha.
But no, yeah,
Okay.
I was the educator for, higher ed, college professor for that 16 years. And again, much like when I had started at Northern as a student, I got to be a part of this really kind of a changing, this time in technology, not so much as content, but
Mhm.
technological changes. When I started in audio and video production as an undergrad student, literally razor to tape to edit audio. I've got that
Yeah.
under my belt where you don't want to put a razor blade near radio people too often, but it's the way it was for that. But and a lot of my video production was all tape to tape. I luckily missed the film editing side of things and that, but tape to tape, working on a beta SP 3/4 inch, all these different formats. When
Mhm.
I became an educator, it was at that time that it was still tape to tape on the video side and still razor on the audio side. And it was just beginning to usher in that NLE, the nonlinear editing, digital editing for both audio and
Right.
video.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I'd gotten some experience prior to that, very early stuff, even before that there was an Apple. Final Cut Pro was their first one, and it kind of moved in with iMovie. But before that, there was a format called Media 100 that was really at the forefront of all this digital editing. So I learned how to do that at an early time. I got certified on the Apple stuff at one point in time, and um, but it was a small enough program that I was able to do both video and audio. And then eventually we moved into some film studies and film theory into that as well. But yeah, so it was an exciting time to be there again at that changing of the technology. And I remember, especially when Adobe introduced Audition as their digital editor for audio, just
Mhm.
being absolutely floored at how easy audio editing had become at that point.
Yep.
The tape to tape stuff, I used to tell my students, nightmare scenarios. I once, in my time as as the freelancer, or the company I was working for, they were cutting a video for Dow about how not to put caustic soda in your eyes, but it had to be in Portuguese. So um, my boss had hired a native Portuguese speaker to come in and do the voiceover, and it was all laid on reel to reel tape. And then that fell upon me to, who doesn't speak Portuguese, to make sure that stuff was edited together correctly. And there was just
Mhm.
piles of tape. It was a nightmare, but digital just changed that. It took a job that took days, if not weeks, and turned it into an hour tops.
Yeah, because I mean, nowadays, I cut my teeth on Pro Tools and Vegas
Yep.
Video when I was working for discjockey.com. Now I use Filmora for practically everything and
Yep.
Odyssey because they're just so much easier to do anything. But I know I never had to learn that, although I was supposed to go to school for radio when I graduated high school, and then my mother had other plans. We ended up moving across the country.
Oh,
But so I never got into the technicals, never had that formal education that I had hoped for that. But I'm glad I didn't have to worry about the cutting and splicing like you did, because I would never have been able to do it. Um,
very, 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 very tough. But yeah.
did you have any, like you said, you were not really into it until you got into it yourself, but as you've been part of that community, were there anybody that were really big influences in the way that you styled your material or your shows?
Radio wise, on the national stage, no, not really. I remember, pre high school days, I remember listening to the radio. In fact, um, you think about Reckless Youth. We had, I won't say how, when I was a early teenager, we found massive lengths of copper wire. and, and real
Found.
thin copper found. Well, yeah, technically found. It came from some geological experimentation, and they were attached to blasting caps. How's that?
Uh-huh.
So they just left it abandoned. But we found hundreds and hundreds of feet of copper wire at the time, and I remember climbing up into a tree in our old farmhouse and stringing that into the tree and hooking it into my radio in my room just so I could pick up Detroit radio at the time.
Yeah.
So I lived in a small rural town outside of Lansing. We were probably 30, 40 miles from Lansing, but 60 miles from Detroit. So we're in kind of that I-96 corridor, if you're familiar with lower Michigan. So I would listen to Lansing radio, but I really wanted to listen to Detroit radio and WRIF in particular. So, well, there was really nobody on the national stage. I mean, of course, you're going to hear the likes of Dick Clark, or later on, like Don Imus, for example. Nobody on the national stage really captivated me, but the Detroit DJs did. You get Arthur Penhollow or Jim, JJ Johnson and the Morning Crew, George Baird, aka Dick the Bruiser. Those were a lot of the ones that I just really got a kick out of listening to, as crazy as the morning zoos were in the 80s at that time. But more to the point of who influenced me once I'm into this, it was really more people that I got to know and learn from at the local level. The AM station that I had worked for, that was a news talk, when it became a news station, a gentleman by the name of Morris Thomas, he's long since passed away, was a big influence, because he brought me in. He says he knew me from the college radio station and said, we're doing this. It's just got to be, you got to aim yourself a little bit differently to reach a classic rock or rock audience versus the college radio cutting edge stuff, where you can't be as wild,
Right.
or more so on here. And even so much the top 40 station, probably one of the worst managers I've ever worked for in my life at this station that I worked overnights on. I was just not a great person, but I learned from him, and I incorporated that not only into my management style down the line, albeit as I learn how not to treat people and how not to do things when you're managing a station. That's just as big of an influence, I think, as somebody who can take you under their wing and show you how to do things the right way. So I took a bad experience and said, okay, if and when I ever get to manage, which I ultimately did get to manage people, this is not what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
And I did my marked best to make sure that it was done in that way. So that's a good way to do it. And then even when I get down here, a station that I worked part-time for, but it was really kind of more of a fill-in basis, is another talk radio station down here in the Saginaw, Michigan area, WSGW. A couple of the guys that work there, Dave Maurer, he is not long, but he retired a couple of years ago. And another morning board op named Charlie Rude. These guys I learned from because of their work ethic. I mean, two of the hardest working people you've ever seen in radio in your life, dedicated to their station, dedicated to their community, and dedicated to what they do and how they do it, making it the best they do. So, as far as the influences go, I think it's really along the lines of more the people that I get to know and learn from.
That's
And
cool.
I truthfully, I wanted as an educator, that's what I really tried to pass along to a lot of the students. And I did have a few radio students. The program I taught was more video centric, but there was audio in there too. And we can get to that because of my views on how radio has changed over the past 30 years.
Yeah. Well, let's hear it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you and I could probably talk a blue streak about what has happened from radio in the 80s to radio now. It has changed so much, and it's all mostly because so many there's just like 3 or 4 companies that own about 70 or 80% of the stations in the whole country.
I'm going to go on a little mini rant here, if I can.
Absolutely.
This goes back to 1996 and the Clinton deregulation of the FCC, paying off the big corporations. It allowed for group ownerships. So you have a city. I'll take Marquette, for example, or even down here in Saginaw, in Lower Michigan. Prior to 96, there were rules in place that said any entity cannot own more than one AM/FM combo station. And that created not only competition, but that created jobs, because then you had a rock station, you had a country station, you had a talk station, you had a hit station. You had whatever else you wanted to put in there. And each one of those stations had its own air staff. Each one of those stations had its own sales staff and engineering staff.
Right.
And then the dereg hit and the corporation stepped in and they said, okay, the rules are changed now. Now you can't own more than one group in a market. So the corporation steps in and says, we want one country station, we want one rock station, we want one talk station, we want one whatever station. And now we can consolidate. We've got one sales force, we've got one engineer crew. And in some cases, we've got jocks that are being shared across the board, and they've cut just a tremendous amount of jobs out of that. And that goes back now, like I said, to 96. You're talking over 25 years already, or 30 years now almost into that way.
Yeah.
I'm getting my right here. I think trying to get my my years down. So you've got kind of that corporate structure look and change. And I'm not saying that corporate ownership is bad, because that brings a lot more money in, but it takes away, in my humble opinion, it takes away a lot of the local necessity of a station. Stations need to be local. FM and AM need to have a local presence. They need to be local. They need to serve their community. It's on the FCC license, for crying out loud. They serve the community via public airwaves. And it's hard to do if you've got a corporate ownership out of town and they're just trying to soak whatever ad dollars they can out of said town.
Yeah. So and all of this is, your experiences has mostly been in the smaller and medium markets.
Yep.
And I've been living in Boston for 30 plus years now, watching the Boston radio scene. We have one station that has changed its call letters and its format 11 times in 30 years.
Jeez, wow.
Same. And it's only changed hands twice. So it's like, it's just nuts. They were pop, and then they were classic rock, then they were all 70s, and then they were talk again, and then they were sports, and then they were Mike FM, which was that variety format that was really hot in the early 2000s. And then they went through a couple more in a jam station. Now they're back to being Boston sports radio. It's just crazy that they, when I was growing up, you would very rarely, when I was listening to the Spokane market when I was a kid, and I was living near Spokane, Washington, the stations never changed. You might see a little tiny tweak here or there, but you didn't have these huge format overhauls and letter changes and everything that have almost been commonplace in the more recent markets.
Yep. I mean, it's a given, because as the moods change, as the markets change, you're going to get the need to flip. I mean, let's take one of the more famous fictional flips of all time, and that being from WKRP switching over, albeit fictional. There's a great example of throwing a market on its ear. Major market, again, fictional, but still a fun one to think about. But the stations, I think it was more of a risk prior to the dereg to do something like that, because the only reason you'd want to switch is to say, we're going to go head to head with this other rock station because we think we can do better than them, which would maybe ultimately lead to the other one slacking off and saying no. But with the lack of competition, now you don't have stations competing against each other. You've got corporations. And so you're going to get 2 or 3 rock stations, one of these Doug FMs or whatever they name it. There's those stupid things are still floating around, I think, even here.
They are. Yes, they are.
They are. So you're going to get that competition, but it's not the same, because it's just group against group instead of station against station trying their best to win out that local person.
Yeah. The one thing that's been interesting, I was an avid radio fan when I was a kid. I listened to the various stations. I was mostly top 40, but occasionally would switch to a news channel or whatever, and the college radio for Dr. Demento and a couple of the countdown shows. And but I mean, in the Boston market, you've gotten so flooded with most of the crap up here, the same stuff. There was one gentleman by the name of Bob Bittner. He passed away a couple of years ago, who ran his own little tiny station from Maine, and it simulcasted to several channels in the Northeast. When he passed away, John Garabedian bought it, and they are still on the air and still doing what they called the memory format, which is music from the 40s to the mid 70s. And it's all listener supported. They do not take advertising at all.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is the kind of station I used to love listening to. And I still do like that station. Unfortunately, the name of it escapes me at the moment. I haven't had it on for a couple of years, but um, it's it's just something unique, and there's so little uniqueness left unless you're in the very small markets. There's very little uniqueness left in radio.
Well, and technology, I think, where we've come in the past 20 years via internet and internet stations and the ability to deliver your favorite station anywhere on the planet has
Hmm.
really had an effect on that. If I want to, I could listen to my old college station because they're online. You no longer are tethered to that terrestrial signal length of oh well, it's a 100,000 watt station. Once you get that 60-mile radius, you're about done for. So, and even
Yeah.
even in vehicles now, where you can just as easily hook up your streaming through your phone into the vehicle, that's switching that. And I think radio, as we know it, is going to undergo some bigger changes here in the next 10, 15 years. Heck, even in the next 2 or 3 years, that people may or may not realize that I think is going to be detrimental. I think maybe I'm getting ahead of our conversation a little bit here, but I think that radio is going to fare better than local television is. And again, I've worked both, I've taught both, and I think that radio is positioned to survive the upcoming changes better than television is, local television news and specifically.
Yeah, I
Lo-
agree.
Local television production is pretty much all but dead as it is. There's no, I mean, there is a few out there, but locally produced programs, with the exception of a few on the public broadcast side, there's nothing.
Yeah, you're old enough to remember, like I do. I'm maybe 2 or 3 years older than you, I think. When I was growing up in the Spokane area, they had local shows on the various channels, and we had 3 channels plus
Yep.
PBS, not 250 channels. Um, and they would have local market stuff. Today in Boston, they only produce news. They don't really produce.
Yep.
Channel 5 has Chronicle, which is basically a PM magazine type show.
Yep.
Other than that, they don't produce anything separate
Yep.
anymore, and it's because I think radio is probably going to do better than that because they can still hit the community, unlike the TV, which is all being so many conglomerates are funneling the news in from one place and funneling all that in. I think that's going to be a big problem in the future. You're right.
Yeah, radio wise, okay, for example, a former student of mine, uh, my earlier days of teaching, has gone on to a very good radio career here in the mid Michigan area. He moved out west for a while, came back to mid Michigan. Matt Bingham, he works at the rock station here. A great guy, tremendously dedicated and hardworking individual. I mean, he is everywhere and he understands how to make local radio work. And that's the type of thing I think that will keep radio alive, are people and personalities like that. Now, his station, uh, he does a live morning zoo. They get a little wild and crazy like morning zoos are supposed to. They're a little bit on that edge on there. But then later on in the afternoon, they pipe in a talent from somewhere else, another city, part of the corporation.
Right.
So your local DJs are few and far between, and that's going to be the lifeline that keeps people there. But the thing is, they do it so seamlessly now that people don't realize that that afternoon jock is in another city and just voicing something over for the station group that she works for or they work for.
The only way you'd realize it is if the person is a national name, like Ryan Seacrest's
Yeah. Oh yeah.
show.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sure there are people, although it hasn't taken off completely yet. It's slowly gaining markets. Show called Liveline with Mason Keltner. I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's
I'm
produced by
not.
John Garabedian. It's produced here in Boston, and it is on 15 channels across the country now. And it is an old school call in live request show from 8
Wow.
until 11:30 every night, that several stations are carrying. Mason is 23, 24. He's a young dude just
Hmm.
getting into the business, and he is really good at what he does. And something like that on a national level is a good thing and a bad thing. And that was proven by the success of Radio Disney, I think, in the
Yep.
90s and the 2000s.
Yep.
I mean, when Radio Disney was the last true top 40 outlet in the country, you have a problem. I'm a
Yeah.
top 40
Yeah.
guy. I know you didn't like it, but I was always a top 40 guy. And in the late 90s, when I was working for Transworld, I would tune to our local Radio Disney outlet before I tuned to any local station because they were playing better music and had better jocks.
Well, and plus it was audience reactive. I remember the Radio Disney,
Yeah.
they had a station out of Flint too. And albeit, your chances of getting through were nil because you're up against the rest of the country trying to call in to
Yeah.
these other stations. But still, I mean, the thought is there, is the way I looked at something like that.
Yeah. I think the days are gone now where you were mentioning everything's on the internet. You don't have to wait until 8:15 in the evening anymore.
Nope.
When I was a kid just outside Spokane, and I love the Spokane channels, but 8:15, I was tuned to 640 KFI Los Angeles every
Yep.
night. That was my station. And if there was some news breaking, I was listening to KSL Salt Lake City. I wasn't listening to the local stations because they didn't have anything on.
Yeah. Well, and
I miss that kind of thing.
This gets into, and you could talk radio, you could talk streaming, you could talk television, streaming, and television broadcast. This is all really kind of a matter of active versus passive consumption.
Yeah.
If you are a passive viewer, you can pick it up wherever, but the active viewers are the ones that the stations want, because these are people that seek out personalities. These are people that seek out shows. These are people who seek out times that these are there, and they're going to be the more dedicated viewers, likely to share, likely to interact. And I think that's really kind of where it's going. Well, it should be going, but not.
Yeah. So, as I said when I emailed you, let's quote Harry Chapin here. When did you decide to get out of jocking and start that record store?
Well, the getting out of jockeying, it's not something that ever completely and totally abandoned me. The podcast that I do with Steve, the videos I do on our store's channel, I view as kind of an extension of what I did at college radio. It's just now there's video attached to it, and there's the streaming. So I guess I'm a little hypocritical when I talk about streaming. I get that. But for me, it was kind of a matter of practicality. Radio is what I'd always wanted to do. But I also kind of realized that, again, the $2.85 an hour, granted it was $1986, wasn't going to provide for a family. Television fared a little bit better for me. I earned a salary as a television news reporter and anchor, and I did well at the time in the early 90s when that. Freelance video is just kind of, I'm moving to where I felt I needed to be at the moment, but I'd always had kind of that radio itch in the background. Great case in point, and this is while I was still working television way back when the movie, the Christian Slater movie, Pump Up the Volume, came out. You remember that, right? He started a little pirate radio station in his basement. My wife and I saw that in the theater, and when we left, she turned to me, she goes, "Don't you dare. Don't you dare." She knew that would be there. I mean, you could easily start an internet radio station now, and if I had the inclination, i.e. the time to do something like that, when I'm not running a record store, I probably could and would do something like that. But even when I moved from broadcast application production, radio, television, into the educational side of things, that was kind of an interesting little move for me, because I still was involved with this, but now I could work to get young people interested and give them what I had hoped was a good educational foundation to enter this ever-changing and ever-challenging industry. I mean, and I was honest with them at the forefront. I said, not a lot of you are going to be able to do this when you're done here. You've got to meet certain levels of expectations. You've got to meet certain levels of talent. Not everybody's going to do this. And if you can do it and you can do it right, you're going to do good at it. And if you can't, you're going to just say, well, I remember the days when I got to do some of this stuff. But for me, when I moved into the educational side of things, it was a small enough community college. I worked my butt off there, getting this program off the ground and getting it organized. And once that kind of was into a pattern, I then was able to go, and I was doing stuff with the radio and television station on campus as it was. I'd sit in and do pledge drives, go on air with them from time to time from there. When I had enough, clout and or time in that, is when I said, hey, can I do a radio show? Please, I'll do my best to, keep it kind of toned down. And so it never left from there. But the the notion of when did I get into the record store side of things, I think we've talked about this on our podcast with Steve a couple times too. I had kind of that, how old was I? I'm trying to think. 8 years ago now. I'm just about to be 60 here shortly. So, the early 50s, you reach that career change where it's almost a little too late to start a new career. And I was kind of ushered out of higher education prior to COVID, which turned out to be a blessing and a half because the courses I taught were all face to face. And so I would have
Yeah.
gone 2 years not able to teach. And I don't know how that would have worked. There's, the stuff I did could not be done online. There's no way that it could have been.
Right.
Not to mention that the whole aspect of how broadcasting, and this includes radio and television, has changed so dramatically from the more formal education I got in the 80s to the to the graduate stuff I did in the early 2000s. It's all kind of out the window now, thanks to something like YouTube. You can say that these are the certain rules of the road, so to speak, for creating a coherent piece of audio production. Here are the rules for video editing that must be adhered to. And here's a dude doing weird stuff with massive jump cuts on YouTube, and he gets 10 million views. So where's the logic in that? there is none anymore. So faced with a career change, 8+ years ago now, coming up on 9 years, the idea of moving from broadcasting to a record store, they're related, obviously. Music is somewhat related. And it was just kind of a fortunate thing for me to be able to step into this when I was, we were still kind of vinyl, and I don't like the term vinyl resurgence. I fight against that constantly, but I don't know what else to call it. But
it never really went away. It just got popular again.
For some of us, it just got popular again. So I was able to get in early enough on that back in 2017 as my career and my life was changing. A little too old to say I'm going to try to get back into radio because I'd been so distant from it. Even though I've been teaching it, I don't think I'm going to get a job in radio. And I'm certainly not going to get a job on TV looking old and fat like I am.
Oh, please.
So, the record store gave me a chance to be my own boss. It gave me the opportunity to work through the YouTube channel to do what I do on there and still be kind of true to my roots with music and being a DJ and having fun with what I do. And now the podcast lets me do that even more. So it's all still connected, but I'm just doing that in and around the environment of running a business that just happens to be a super fun record store to cool record store to hang out.
Do you think all the stuff that you learned as part of that general manager's job and stuff has been a big help to you as the owner of a record store?
It has, to some extent. Being a small business person is something that had never been on my radar, and that's markedly just tremendously different than working for somebody else as a manager, working for a corporation running a radio station or working for a college running a program. None of that prepares you to be what it's like to own a business in and of yourself. If I was at a business that had employees, I think that would be probably a better mode for running and working with people. But as it is, it's me. So, when I complain to the boss about needing time off, it's usually in the mirror saying I need. So I mean, in some respects it did. The budgeting aspects that I did from my early management days in radio and the budgeting aspects that I had been in charge of with the collegiate program definitely came into play here, because now I've never been much of a fiscal guy, but I'm able to look at things and understand that this is a good purchase. This is not a good purchase. This is a good use of my time. This is not a good use of my time, because time becomes money at this point when you're running your own business. So, it helped, but I'm also to that point in my life where this is fun. And radio was fun, but radio is no longer fun unless you're at a certain level.
Right. Do you find, as the business person, do you find that today's radio, as it is defined into the, like 8 songs an hour and all the same songs, do you find that it affects the titles that sell really well? I mean, because you handle only vinyl, you've made that clear on several occasions. You don't do CDs. Is it more from radio, or is it more from people hearing it on stream or on the internet that you get most of the sales from?
I think it's more internet and streaming now, and to me, that's a little sad. I gotta admit that's a little sad. But
Yeah.
having said that, it's radio's fault for do for that.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
is.
when I was cutting teeth in radio, college radio, even in the early commercial stages, what's the one thing they're pounding? Back sell, pre-sell, back sell. Say what's coming up, say what you heard. I get complaints now from customers who come in and they say, okay, I'm looking for this song. What's this song? You know, they've never heard of Shazam or something like that. But and I literally will have people tell me lyrics and say, okay, what's this song? And I'll either know it or I'll be able to look it up fairly easy for them. And I think it was just a week or two ago, somebody said, well, I try to listen to the radio, but they never tell you what they're playing anymore. They
Yeah.
never say, you know, and
They
there are
think you're
stations that
watching the
do.
website where it's
Yeah.
scrolling by.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think radio does what it does best, and that's get information and entertainment out to people. But people consume and act upon that information differently now. You know, they're looking for better confirmation about what they like. And same here with streaming too. You know, if I'm interested in a song, like for example, you know, as of the recording of this, we've got a new Wet Leg album due to come out, a group that I've been very hep on for a couple of years now. So where did I go to hear this? I went to YouTube, and then I went to look for their channel. I looked for streaming stuff to try to say, okay, get a handle. More so for how many of these am I going to need for the store, but also for me, am I going to want one of these? Do I enjoy this? But so it's two pronged for me. Is this, I have to kind of
Mhm.
roll the dice on this. Is this something that's going to be big? And sadly, I don't know as if radio has that much of an effect anymore as you know, how many
No, I
streams
don't.
is this going? How many plays is this getting on YouTube? And are people talking about it on social medias? Is there a buzz, I guess is the word.
Yeah. Let me guess, Carlson's already pre-ordered 2 copies of the Wet Leg.
Just one. He and I, we're going to
Just
talk
one,
about it.
okay.
This, yeah, we're going to talk about this coming Sunday. I
I
actually
know
had
he
one.
loves them, so
I had one sent to him. We were both very skeptical of the new Wet Leg, just so you know, because the stuff,
Mhm.
this is also the detriment. The stuff that they put out online did not impress us initially.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So, but
That's the problem. And then, of course, half the artists that are out there today don't do physical media anymore anyway.
no,
So
they
that's
don't.
gotta be crazy.
And they're concentrating more on their look, and that is a whole nother episode, TC. If you want to
Yeah,
get into
I
it, we
know.
can go
Yeah,
from there.
we could do a whole thing on that. Before we go, tell us about two guys talking about records. You guys are one of the biggest shows on Spotify when it comes to the music side.
Are we really? I guess we look at the stuff once in a while, but yeah, the two guys talking about records, it's a fun podcast. Steve Carlson, known him for years. He started coming into the store shortly after we opened, lived here in Midland, Michigan. We became friends. He would come in on his day off Sunday. He said, luckily I'm open on Sundays. And so that's his one day to come in. And we just began talking about music every Sunday that he would come in. We'd talk about records. We'd just over shared, we like this, we don't like this here and there and other such. And then one day, as I'm looking for ways to kind of improve the YouTube side of things for the store now, our YouTube channel, yes, it's fun to do, but my ulterior motive on that is all kind of folds back to I need to promote the store
Right.
outside and here and there. By the way, I've done lots of radio campaigns for the store. So local radio, we've done those before too. But then one day we just kind of said, you know, why? I think my wife even chimed in on this. She said, why don't you guys just start recording your weekly conversations and turn it into a podcast? So we did. I mean, the first roughly 100 or so, well, not 100, we're at 116, roughly 50 or so episodes were done audio only because that was just the easiest thing to do. We were looking for something real easy because time wise to do. Once Steve moved away a little over a year ago now, we had to do this over video regardless. So we turned it into a video podcast, and it's
Yep.
just, it's a fun thing to do. We talk about music. It's ancillary to the YouTube channel where I'm attempting to sell things to people and raise awareness. It's just, again, the very base of it is two guys talking about records, and that's what we kind of do. And I think it comes across that Steve and I are friends. We get along very nicely, and I think the shared experience of music, minus our different approaches to it, I think it really kind of adds to that and makes it fun.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I watch a lot of stuff on YouTube. You guys are I am there Sunday evenings waiting for it to come up. I enjoy your show so much.
Well, thank
You
you.
guys are so fun together, and you guys don't always talk about music that I'm a big fan of because you know me. I'm not the alternative type. I'm not Carlson's way out there as far as I'm
Yes.
concerned with his love for punk and Zamrock and all that stuff.
Yep.
But I do get it. I really do enjoy listening to the two of you because uh Kim and I are that way. We talk about music all the time
Yep.
and movies.
Yep.
We had a podcast for years
Yep.
about movies. So it's like, it just makes it fun. And you guys make the vinyl community a lot brighter just being there.
Oh,
So
cool. Much appreciated,
that's
TC. Thank you. We have fun.
always
I think we're 116 episodes deep now, and we're going to be going as long as we can go. There was one other thing I forgot to share this with you at the very
okay.
head end of this.
Hmm.
I've been doing a little bit of, they call it decluttering on the home front. You reach a certain age and you start saying, do I need this? Do I
Oh,
need this?
what I'm doing this week. Yes, I
Yes, there
get
we
you.
go. In a little, I don't even want to call it a keepsake box. I found this, and let me hold this up as best I can. This is
Oh,
my original radio telephone operator's permit from the Federal Communications Commission.
yeah. I have no
Back,
idea where mine is. I had one when I
yeah,
was in high school too.
yep. Back in the day, if you worked FM broadcast radio, AM broadcast radio, you had to be licensed by the FCC. It was class 3, I think, whatever this is. So yeah, mine's dated 1987. So I don't know how I got that a little bit later in through there, but I think shortly after this date, you didn't need to get these anymore. But so this, I
Yeah,
was just kind of neat. It's my United States of America Federal Communications Commission restricted radio telephone operator permit from Form
yeah.
753.
I got
James
one of
Gleason
those
is
when we were talking.
authorized. Yeah, and you had to post these. Your station had to post those up on the wall with your name on them, so you'd have
Yeah.
that just in case the FCC came a knocking.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, not like they actually do anything anymore. Um, Jim, thank you so much for talking about radio for me.
Indeed.
I'm a huge fan, and I have a couple other questions after we get off, but it's nothing to do with basic. But again, thank you for your time,
Yep.
and I really appreciate it. And anything you'd like to tell people
Well,
before we go?
I forgot. I said I was going to come back and talk about the connection to the name of the store, and
Oh
because I get
yes.
asked, why is your store called Radio Wasteland? And it's actually, remember I said that I talked my way into doing a
Mm-hmm.
alternative music and punk show on a public radio station that played classical and jazz when I was in higher education.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The name of that radio show was Radio Wasteland, and that predates the record store by 10 years. And for whatever reason I picked that, but the reason I did that, and this goes back to my nerdness and the television side of things. The way former FCC Commissioner Newton Minow gave that famous speech in the 1960s about television becoming a vast wasteland.
Ash Wasteland. Yep.
If only he had seen it today, for crying out loud. He'd go. So I just kind of took that a step further and said, you know what? Radio can be a wasteland too. And that was my little dig at that with the name of my radio show. So when the time came for that major career shift and change, and he said, well, we're going to open a record store. And I said, well, shoot, now what are we going to call this record store? It's got to be something unique. It's got to be something cool. And I thought, well, I've already got Radio Wasteland branding out there on social media. Let's use that. And
Sure.
it seemed to work. It worked well for us. So
That's good. Once again, Jim, thank you so much for talking with me.
indeed, very much, CTC. Thank you very much for having me on here. It's great.
Jim, thank you for having that discussion with me. I am so sorry for all the screw ups that happened during the recording, but we were able to pull it out. And I really enjoyed listening to this. You had so much great stuff to talk about, and I hope everyone else will really enjoy that and has really enjoyed listening to it. You can catch Jim. He does several weekly shows from Radio Wasteland Records. He does a Saturday morning show around 9:45 Eastern. And he also puts up new release show on Saturday. There's two guys talking about records with he and Steve Carlson, the podcast, which you can get on all your favorite podcast servers as well as on the Radio Wasteland Records YouTube channel that uploads every Sunday around 7 p.m. And if you live in the Midland, Michigan area, go stop by and purchase from him because he's a cool dude. Next week is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be an interview. It's just going to be one-on-one, you and I, out there. I'm going to talk about the place I worked for 2.5 years. It was my dream job, and I would like you guys to know all about it. And I'll be posting some samples, maybe, hopefully, digging up a few pictures, and more when I describe what it was like being an early part of the radio revolution on the internet, when I talk about my experiences with discjockey.com. Until next time, for Permanent Airwaves, I'm TC Kirkham, TKR Video Central. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the interwebs. Ciao, baby.